Today on First Financial BizBeat, how former P&Gers are helping countries across the world fight the coronavirus.
This is not a paradigm shift. This is a whole new paradigm. As employers, we have to ask ourselves the question, what's really possible now?
And how to reimagine the workspace as workers start returning to the office. First Financial BizBeat starts right now. Good afternoon and welcome to First Financial BizBeat, presented by the Business Courier. I'm Kyla Woods. Well, of course, our lives have been upended these past few months. A worldwide pandemic will do that, and nowhere is it more apparent than in the workplace. Slowly, though, workers are starting to return. But for those going back, things will not be business as usual. On the front page centerpiece this week, offices reassembled. Business owners are learning that working from home is doable and that employees can be just as productive at their kitchen table as they are at their work desk. Technology makes that pretty easy, but what is missing are random interactions that spark ideas. Patrick Donnelly, owner of BHDP Architecture, touched on that.
I think we need to understand why we were in the office in the first place. And we want to give, as employers, people an opportunity to work and a reason to come back to the workplace. So think about how you can make that an experience that captures the things that people might be missing from not being together.
Well, old habits will have to be replaced by new ones, as the immediate future is a workplace that supports wellness. Courier reporter Tom Demaropoulos talked to experts in some of the city's major white-collar industries about the logistics of bringing workers back. And he joins us now via Skype with what he learned. Tom, it's always great to see you, and this topic is very timely.
You too, Kyla. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, there could be a hitch in the work plan, of course, as folks get ready to go back to work. But you heard there that places are, of course, preparing for that. Employees probably having a little more difficulty preparing for that, of course, as we get ready to go back to school and send the kids back too. So what are some of the biggest obstacles that employers are trying to prepare for as folks get ready to go back to work?
Yeah, so one of the biggest obstacles is getting their people ready to go back to work. That's going to be the big thing is making sure people are mentally prepared to return to the office and that they feel psychologically safe. That's going to be just as important as their physical safety, is that in their minds that they feel safe coming back to the office. So what are some ways to do that? You know, one of the things is moving the cleaning schedule. So having cleaning being done while people are in the office as opposed to at night when most offices are typically clean. That way people can see the cleaning is happening. They can see that the spaces are being cleaned up and wiped down. Another thing is really working with your employees to make sure that they are mentally prepared, that they are comfortable coming back to the office. So that's another big key is having that conversation with them and making sure that you know where they are, where their mindset is when they return to the office.
And of course, with that mindset and with that comfortability comes the preparation that is required when you're dealing with a medical pandemic and health issues that do require confidentiality. So did any of the experts you talked to speak to that point and how they're preparing to address that?
Yes, I spoke to a number of legal experts and HR professionals about this. And you know, one of the things that companies are requiring is either a health screening or a temperature check. And it's important to do those things to make sure you catch any potential illness before it comes into the office, but you have to do this in the right way. You can't disclose that information because it becomes a medical record for that person. So the HR department or whoever handles that needs to make sure to keep all of those files separate from other employees' information and separate from their personnel file. But it's important to have that because that gives you a way of tracking to make sure if something were to happen, you can go back to it and do some contact tracing and let other employees know that they may have been near someone who tested positive.
And you just mentioned that communication piece. It's, of course, already a vital component of a workplace, but it'll be much more important once we enter this new normal. So are there any other specific tactics, I guess, that employers are looking to put in place as far as improving communication methods for those employees who will be back in the office and those who will still be maybe working remotely?
Sure. Kyla, one of the things that was really important that I learned in reporting out this story was that employers need to make sure that employees not only see this information, but they interact with it and they understand it and they agree to it and they kind of send approval that they get it. So, some experts said they should, watch a video and then kind of sign off on the fact that they've seen all of this information, or that they should go through some sort of web-based training to make sure that they're really hitting this point home. The other point, Kyle, that's really important is that communication needs to be a two-way street. So there needs to be a feedback loop, so employees feel just as comfortable going to their managers and their bosses and saying, I'm not comfortable with this, or I like the way this is going, or this is bothering me. So if you don't have those kind of feedback loops built into your system right now is the time to really work on doing that.
Tom Demaropoulos, I think we're all looking forward to seeing how this new workplace environment will work out. Thank you so much for your work on this story. We look forward to reading more.
Great, Kyla. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there could be a hitch in that back to work plan. Cases of the coronavirus are rising. The spike has led to more drastic measures to stop the spread. Masks are now a must in most of greater Cincinnati. They're mandatory when in public in Hamilton, Butler, and Claremont counties. Same with all of Kentucky. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear says wearing a mask is key to not having to shut everything down again.
If we do this, and if we really do it, not just when we think other people are watching, I believe that we can keep restaurants open at 50%. I believe we can keep retail open at 50%.
The masks are required inside businesses, on public transit, and in public spaces where you cannot socially distance. All of Cincinnati's largest architecture firms were approved for Paycheck Protection programs, saving about 1,000 jobs. And 51 companies in greater Cincinnati received loans of at least $5 million. The SBA doesn't give specific dollar amounts, but the biggest loans are in the $5 to $10 million range. Some of those companies include Northern Kentucky hotel chain Columbia Hospitality, Frisch's, and Thunderdome Restaurant Group. The Covington Diocese also received at least $5 million. The coronavirus is inspiring a few Procter & Gamble retirees to put their thinking caps back on to save lives. John Molander is the president of Venti Now. The retired P&G engineer designed a portable and fairly basic ventilator to help patients around the world. It uses a bag valve mask, just like the one you see in an ambulance. Molander said he got the idea after a conversation with his sister.
How can we help, and what would help look like? Is the phrase I always use with people. What would help look like? And so as I described that to my sister Karen, the ER doc, and talked to her about it, said, John, if there's any way we can get more ventilators. And that's really was the impetus.
The ventilators are being built and tested now and will soon ship to Africa and South America. Ohio's highest rated hotel is open again for the first time in months. The 21C Museum and Hotel downtown closed to guests in March. The reopening will take place in phases with shortened hours of operation for the museum and its restaurant, Metropole. All employees will wear masks, and temperature checks are required for all employees and guests. Rooms will also be empty for 48 hours between guests. The boutique hotel was deemed the #1 hotel in Ohio last year by U.S. News and World Report. The Carnegie Gallery is also open again. The art venue reopened exhibitions this past week. The Carnegie is also allowing 40 guests, only allowing 40 guests per day to make room for adequate distancing and cleaning. And those guests must make reservations and, of course, wear a mask.
We have 5 exhibitions curated by 5 different folks with some group shows, some solo shows. It's a really wide range of work on view, everywhere from some conceptual-based projects to film and video, works from a collection here in town.
The Carnegie Galleries will be open from noon to 4, Thursdays through Sundays. Something that won't be happening this year: GetaFest. Glears canceled the long-running festival. Organizers say the city of Newport is not allowing any public events at its Riverfront Park for the rest of the year. They originally hoped to reschedule. Still to come on First Financial BizBeat, Kroger is beefing up its meat department with fake meat. We'll tell you why. And congratulations to Cash Shake, the founder and CEO of Be Somebody, is another one of our 40 Under 40 honorees. Jeff Goldstein runs AccuPoll, one of the area's largest research firms. The former P&G brand manager's job is to keep a keen eye on consumer trends. And he's noticed a pretty major shift lately. He says usually it takes years to see changes in opinions and values. But both the protests over racial inequality and the coronavirus pandemic have cut that to mere weeks. And advertisers are paying attention.
What clients want most is to skate where the puck is going, to anticipate what changes are going to persist long after the pandemic is over, to understand how those will affect those brands, and to prepare for those changes and understand how to capitalize on them in the future.
And Kroger spent the last 3 months studying another trend, the rise of plant-based meat. The Cincinnati-based chain found that if you want to boost meatless meat sales, put it next to real meat. The research shows sales surged when it's sold in the meat aisle as opposed to the vegetarian section. Kroger rolled out its own meat alternative in January. Well, any investor knows the market can take you on a wild ride, but one of the trickiest is the currency market. Joe Arity of downtown-based Bannockburn talked about how they fared during the pandemic with Courier reporter Steve Watkins.
Thanks, Kyla, and thanks for being here, Joe.
Pleasure to be here, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah, so many people have seen how the stock market has been so dramatically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. When they look at their 401ks or their other stock portfolios, I mean, there's no question it's had a big impact. What has the pandemic done as far as currency markets, though? People don't know as much about that.
Yeah, Steve, and the currency markets have been moving quite rapidly, as you might expect as well. You know, all financial markets are impacted by this pandemic. Volatilities, if you look back to January, at the start of the year, they were pretty subdued. And by the time we got to, say, March or April, which many people are considering the height of the pandemic, those volatilities had doubled or even tripled. And so, you know, exchange rates are skewed, things are pretty extreme, and that can mean a lot for companies doing business abroad.
Sure. So let's talk about that a little more. What does that volatility mean for, let's say, a local business that is doing business internationally?
Well, it can go both ways, kind of depending on which direction they are. So I'll give you two examples. Let's say you're a local company here and you have an operation down in Mexico, a manufacturing facility. Back in January, $1 bought about 19 pesos. At the height of the pandemic in March and again early April, that exchange rate spiked all the way to north of 25 pesos to the dollar. So what that meant really is there was a 35-ish% decrease in the operating costs of that facility down in Mexico in US dollar terms. So that was a big positive for a lot of companies if they had that direction. On the flip side, you might be a company that exports to Canada and you collect those receivables in Canadian funds. Now, similar to the Mexican peso, the Canadian dollar also depreciated, not quite as much, but when oil traded negative, you may remember that back in April, the Canadian dollar, which is extremely tied to oil, also fell precipitously. And so the biggest differential we saw from low to high point in the dollar's value against the Canadian was about a 12% move. So again, if you're a company here that's exporting into Canada, you had a 12% hit to your bottom line on a dollar equivalent basis. What we try to generally tell our clients is to have a sound and simple hedging strategy in place before the volatility and movement sets in so that you don't have that unknown variable impacting your business.
That makes a lot of sense. Finally, what do you see happening the rest of the year with the US dollar? How do you see that trending?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, right? And I wish we all had those answers. Currency markets, in my personal view, are one of the more unpredictable markets in the financial scope. You know, as the pandemic has, in some people's view, lessened, and I would say that only from the standpoint that economies are opening up, people are allowed to go outside to some extent. You know, that helped the overall outlook, and the dollar, when that happens, actually tends to decline in value. When the pandemic gets worse and the lockdowns maybe come back into play, that's usually a flight to quality and the dollar gets stronger. So that's kind of the push and pull that we're seeing. And it's a little bit counterintuitive. So again, positive economic outcomes based on the lockdowns easing is typically dollar negative and vice versa. The big wild card later this year, we have the election, and currencies typically don't like political uncertainty. So if the election race is tight, I would think that the dollar would likely decline, and put that against the backdrop of which way the virus is trending, and people can make good decisions based on those factors.
Okay, it'll be something to watch the rest of the year. Well, thanks for being here, Joe, and back to you, Kyla.
Thank you so much. Well, still to come on First Financial Biz Beat, a dream a decade in the making comes true for a local business owner. We're back right after the break. A local clothing line finally has a brick and mortar home after the coronavirus delayed the original opening date. Owner of Originalities, Keisha Asabui, talked to us about opening up on Woodburn Avenue in East Walnut Hills, where they make Ohio-centric T-shirts. She says the pandemic was a setback, but perseverance and flexibility allowed her dream to come true.
Originalities has been around 10 years. It'll be 11 years next week. So, this is a really big deal just because it's just a testament for people to, keep following your dreams and never give up.
Keisha says this store has been her end goal since she printed her first T-shirt a decade ago. The potential to be one of the greatest economic opportunities of this generation. That's how a venture capital fund launched by OTR-based Lightship Capital is being described. It's the largest ever fund dedicated to investing in minority-led startups in the Midwest. And Courier publisher Jamie Smith talked to the woman who spearheaded it all, Candace Matthews-Brackeen.
Candace, I want to thank you for being on the show with us today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
We just heard Kyla say that Lightship Capital launched the largest ever fund dedicated to Midwest minority-led startups. But before we get into that fund, can you tell our viewers a little bit about what Lightship does? What's your mission?
So we launched Lightship Capital to kind of deal with this issue of funding not going to women and minority founders. So Lightship Capital is a $50 million fund dedicated to funding companies here in the Midwest that are led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA+, and the disabled. It's the largest fund ever raised by a Black woman, first-time fund by a Black woman here in the United States, and the largest here in the Midwest, dedicated specifically to this demographic.
That's incredible. I read recently that systemic racism has led that majority of venture capital investment has been allocated to white males. I'm assuming that's kind of what you're trying to change, right?
Absolutely. So less than 3% of VCs, so venture capitalists, are people of color. And less than 1% of venture capital goes to a company that's led by an African American. So if you think about the number of African Americans or Black people here in the United States, there's a huge disparity there. If you look at information that's been put out by groups like the Angel Capital Association, women invest in other women. So if you look at a woman's portfolio in Angel Capital, 70% of their portfolio will have women in it, women in leadership. My theory and my thesis is that the more Black-led funds or the more funds led by people of color, the more likely they are to kind of eliminate that systemic racism or implicit bias, and we'll have more companies get funded long-term, because I think that could be the great equalizer.
Yeah, that's awesome. What kind of ventures do you think this fund are going to support? I mean, is there any kind of magical, ventures out there that you guys are looking for, or what do you think this is going to help?
So we love companies with defensible IP. So companies that have really worked through a patent process, et cetera. But we're looking for consumer packaged goods and services, e-commerce companies, artificial intelligence, sustainability companies, and healthcare. So all of those things are sectors that we're really good at, not only here in Cincinnati, especially with CPG, but throughout the Midwest.
Yeah. I've heard you speak several times, and I walk away every time just impressed with your overall vision of what needs to happen. And, these times more than ever, we need people like you that are leading the cause. and that are not just using the words, but putting your words to action. So since we kind of have a good audience here, what would you tell our audience needs to change to make companies like yours and these companies that you guys are trying to fund more successful in Cincinnati?
Wow. I would say that it's time to start putting our money and moving it away from just strictly philanthropy, that folks of color deserve equal levels of investment. We can't move beyond where we are without having an actual financial investment into companies, be that into brick and mortar companies, be that into venture backable companies, whether it's working capital or venture capital. We need to see equal levels of investment, not just in the dealing with poverty issues that we have here in the local area or issues with education. We kind of need to run the whole gamut of things so that we have a more equitable society.
That's awesome. As a father of a 23-year-old daughter just out of college and grad school, she's living in New York. I am happy to see people like you leading in Cincinnati, because I think it's going to take them to see, it's going to take people to see people like themselves leading companies in order for us to have more of them, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you know what? Thank you so much for everything you're doing in this region. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being on our show. And I can't wait to continue to follow you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Jamie and Candace, and thank you for joining us for First Financial BizBeat. For business news around the clock, visit CincinnatiBusinessCourier.com. Make sure you follow us on Twitter and Facebook and sign up for our daily emails. I'm Kyla Woods. Have a great and safe weekend.